As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
It's April 14th, 2024. I'd like to welcome you all to Nation Watch. As we go closer and closer to regional and general elections, we are going to be bringing you information to dispel the Nancy stories being told by the People's Progressive Party. Today, we're going to tell you, and we're going to establish beyond reasonable doubt, that Guyana's economy is in bad hands. My guest today is Mr. Roy Lucas, who's an economist and an accountant, and who last served the government of Guyana as chairman of the Guyana Power and Light, yes, Guyana Power and Light, and the Guyana Revenue Authority. Welcome, Mr. Lucas, to Nation Watch.
Well, thank you very much, Marvin. It remains my pleasure to be here.
It's always good to have you. It's a pity we couldn't do a series on these matters, but as time goes by, I'd ask you to join me from time to time to flesh out matters of this nature as we go along. Now, the People's Progressive Party will have Guyanese believe that they're the best managers of our economy, notwithstanding the fact that rice is collapsing, sugar has collapsed, gold production is down, the price of homes have escalated beyond imagination, and, crime is on the increase. People are no longer feeling safe in their homes, their places of work, their businesses, or on the streets. In 1992, Hugh Desmond Hoyt, then president of Guyana, demitted office and left Guyana on a firm economic foundation. Guyana's growth trajectory was really, really looking good. Mr. Hoyt and his government established what was called the Economic Recovery Program. And where there were rough edges in that program that required some softening, they created the Social Impact Amelioration Program, SIMAP, which brought relief to the poorest of the poor and supported the economic recovery program with limited negative impact. So when Mr. Hoyt demitted office, Guyana was looking good in terms of economic growth. Mr. Lucas, could you walk us through, well, before you do that, let me make this point. The People's Progressive Party were taken by surprise in 1992. They never expected to get into government. So they had no plan, pretty much like Irfan Ali has no plan today. And so they sent for Mr. Asghar Ali from Jamaica to manage the economy. He worked at the central bank in Jamaica, and he came, picked up the economic recovery program and said, this is the plan we'll work with. And stretched the economic recovery program beyond its calculated life expectancy, because it served Guyana's purpose well. Walk us through, if you would, Mr. Lucas, the economic performance of Dr. Jagan's government from 1992 onwards, and as that relates to the implementation or the continued implementation of the economic recovery program of Desmond Hoyt.
Thank you very much, Marvin. And I regard it as a rather interesting introduction, particularly your use of the descriptor and Nancy stories of the PPP, because I believe quite frequently we see representatives of the PPP and the government, telling the economic history of this country using what I would describe as PPP mythology, in an attempt to elevate PPP as a superior political party in Guyana. Spokespersons of the PPP have been continuously treating the people of Guyana a dose of economic history that cannot even be topped by an Aesop's fable. It's that bad. So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, what we saw initially under the PPP, and then make the comparison with what it inherited from the PNC, you know, when it demitted office in the 90s.
And to aid you in that, we'll have a table on screen as you go along.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, this notion that the PPP has, as it were, um, you know, managed this economy well, I think we should look at that table, table one
Yeah,
that
that was
is
just up there.
presented
There you
there.
go.
You can see that in 2000, the economy of Guyana shrank. It- It's not a case of slow growth. It's a case of the economy shrinking, becoming smaller as a consequence of PPP management. And you can see from 2001 all the way down to 2004, that 5-year period, the average growth rate, annual growth rate of the economy was less than 1%. It was barely above half of 1%. What I think would be useful is for us then to um, take a look at the table. Well, I mean, yeah, that graph there, you know, gives you an indication of how erratic the performance of the economy was under the PPP. But I think we should take a look at table two, because table two is very instructive.
Yes, this is the period of the continued implementation of the ERP by Dr. Jagan and his team.
Precisely. So what you see there is that in 1991, the Guyana economy was growing at over 6%. In 1992, it was growing over 7%. And when the PPP took office under Chedi Jagan, I think he had the wisdom to continue implementing that program. And you can see that the economy grew by 8%, 8.5%, all the way up to at least 1994. But it remained very positive until 1997, when I think Dr. Jagan passed away. I think that might have been the year
Yes.
he passed away. So, on average, the economy was growing over 6% when the PNC handed the economy to the PPP. So, very often you hear representatives and spokespersons of the PPP and the government telling you that they inherited a bad economy from the PNC. It's not true. And that is why I'm inclined to agree with the host here that, you know, what we get from the PPP is a continuous dose of, you know, Nancy stories. And so the robust economic growth that took place from 91 was based on, as the host said, an economic recovery program that was prepared and implemented by the PNC under President Desmond Hoyt. And there he had begun intensifying the transformation of Guyana's economy. And Chedi Jagan understood that. He understood the value of that program and the changes that it contained, and he continued to implement it, as I said before, until his death. Now, the interesting thing is this: the strong growth referred to above raises the question, why wasn't the PPP able to help the economy to keep growing at the fast pace of the early 1990s? And, you know, what I find to be very sad is that none of our journalists, I've never heard any of our journalists ask the question of anybody as to what has happened. Nobody has been able to explain, why it is the economy could have gone from a strong growth of over 6% on average every year to what we saw as less than 1%
by 2000.
by 2000 to 2004. Nobody has explained that. But yet the PPP comes out and tries to present itself as the virtuosos of economic growth in this country. So,
One second. So there was positive growth in excess of 6% on average by 97, and by 2000 there was negative growth.
yes.
I mean, how is that possible?
Well, I don't know. I could only put it down to incompetence, because the interesting thing about this is the person who was leading the economy at that time,
That was Barry Jagdeo.
and prior to leading the economy, he was the finance minister. So he should have known what was happening in that economy. He should have known. And therefore, only he could explain why it is that he took a healthy economy and brought it to what we are seeing in the first, period of the decade of the 2000s and so forth. So that's a very interesting comparison. And if we were to continue looking and making the comparisons, we can go to the third table here, where we see in 2005 again our economy shrank.
That was President Jagdeo in 2005, wasn't it?
Yes. It's in 2005. I think that's when we had a major flood.
Yeah.
And I don't think that flood was an accident. I think again it reflects a certain level of incompetence and bad management that resulted in our economy shrinking by 3%. And I want to tell you, your viewers, these are not figures that Raw Lucas constructed. These were taken from speeches, budget speeches, presented to the Parliament of Guyana under the PPP. So the data that I'm putting to you there represents their own admission of their performance of the economy. And so as far as I'm concerned, these tables and graphs that we are looking at least to my mind, show that nothing impressive really took place during the leadership of the PPP with respect to our economy.
What I find very interesting is that, we're having these conversations and we're producing data that is extracted from the government sources. And here you have people like Rick Singh suggesting that you are telling lies. Why does Rick Singh not ask Jagdeo to provide alternative data and establish beyond doubt that the People's Progressive Party in fact managed the economy in a manner superior to the PNC, produce the data? This is the thing about the People's Progressive Party that can get under one's skin. These are the facts. The data comes from government source, but here is a person, gotta be very careful here. Here's a person who assumes the right to disrespect a learned professor, a gentleman who is responsible for educating hundreds of citizens of this country, perhaps some of those who are government ministers under the PPP right now. And the disrespect is there. But fish rot from the head, because this is Jagdeo's behavior. You can't win an argument, so you throw dust in people's eyes. Why does Jagdeo not produce empirical evidence of his stewardship or the stewardship of the People's Progressive Party as it relates to Guyana's economy when touting that they're better managers of our economy?
Well, I don't even have to go there. Look, the data, as I said, is coming from budget speeches that were laid before Parliament. So are we saying that in presenting this
The
information to
PPP lied to the
Parliament,
nation.
they're lying to it, and not only that, they're disrespecting our Parliament?
That's what Rick Singh is saying.
So, I mean, I really and truly have no interest in listening to that sort of nonsense.
I wonder what his real name is. It might be Barrett Dindial or somebody like that.
I don't want to get into personalities on the matter. I want to present information that the people of this country could properly absorb, because it looks to me as if our journalists don't spend time looking at the economic history of this country, the correct economic history of this country that is often told in dates and data, and which is what I am presenting here, because I'm presenting evidence that has occurred over time. And as I said before, all of the information that I'm presenting here appears in budget speeches prepared by the People's Progressive Party and placed before the Parliament of this country. So I'm not trying to engage in some kind of, Nancy story or
Yes.
mythology like the PPP
So-
seems to.
So we move on. Let's go back to Table 3. Table 3 establishes that the economy really took a beating in 2005. The only event in 2005 that could have adversely impacted production was the flood. And you started off by giving your opinion with respect to the flood of 2005. For many Guyanese, it came over as a distraction of tremendous magnitude. Why would any administration hurt its citizens to score points? Is it because of the levels of incompetence being so very high that the only logical outcome would have been a failure, and therefore you create an excuse for a failure?
Well, I mean, I don't know these individuals personally. They're not friends of mine, and we have never had a conversation, about what might have been motivations or the cause of the 3%, loss of income and output in our economy. But I think what is important here is for us to recognize that these fellows are not infallible. They are prone to make mistakes, but they try to project themselves as being invincible. And I think until we and they themselves acknowledge that they live on planet Earth, where there are things referred to as human frailties, we will always continue to have this problem in our country. And it appears to me as if these fellows have believed that, good governance is reflected in the art of deception, and that this country, or as far as they're concerned, they cannot afford, integrity in this country. It seems as if they believe it's too high a price to pay to be honest about what is happening in this country, because what they don't recognize is the impact that their failure to be truthful and honest is having on the lives of people in this country.
We'll go to table 4, where we bring some more expanded numbers. And you'll see that on table 4, which spans from 2000 to 2014, that period leading up to the People's Progressive Party demitting office, you'll see that, and of course, we're talking about pre-oil economy here. We didn't have oil yet. And even when the APNU left office, we still didn't have revenues coming from oil. So here you are with 3 years of negative growth. And this is a large span with an average growth of 2.6% from 2000 to 2014. This includes the Jagdeo and Ramutar presidencies. Mm-hmm. Walk us through these numbers, if you will, please, sir, and tell us what you believe are the factors, based on the numbers that you have at your disposal, responsible for the shrinking of the economy so very often during that period.
Well, again, what I would say is I could only, because there's nothing out there that explains why it is that the PPP was unable to maintain the growth rates of the 90s.
Right.
Because the economy was set to continue growing at that kind of pace. And it appears to me as if, it's a reflection of an unwillingness of the people who were leading the country at the time to really, motivate Guyanese to, do the things that were necessary to help this economy to continue growing in good strength. I think one of the things that we saw was that there was a lack of innovation. Nobody was incentivizing the people of this country to be innovative so that we could take advantage of the opportunities that were emerging at the time globally. We weren't, for example, investing in expanding access for our students, for example, in science and technology. Many of our schools continue up to today not to have adequate science labs where a lot of our kids, could really and truly perhaps discover their talents and hone them if that is something that they want to do in life and so forth. Up to today, we don't have that. As you know, Guyana had introduced a number of high schools, I think they were called community high schools, to allow those persons who were perhaps not academically inclined to begin the process of preparing themselves for some kind of vocation, some kind of jobs that they would be able to be independent, in which they would be able to be, feel some degree of self-respect and so forth. And that would have put them in a position today to be able to make a smooth transition into the oil and gas industry, perhaps having gone through some of the other technical institutes that we have in this country or had in this country and so forth. So to me, it appears as if, there was this lack of attention to really and truly enabling the people of this country to do some of the things that they can do. And we still have the ability, the people of this country still have the ability to do lots of things that perhaps they're not being given the opportunity to do at this particular point in time.
Ms. Lucas, it is evident from the numbers that we've been looking at up to year 2014 that the People's Progressive Party has lost its way as far as managing Guyana's economy is concerned. from the time the economic recovery program of Desmond Hoyt came to an end, whenever that was, 97 or whenever it was, inconsistencies in the numbers, in the growth numbers, emerged. The trouble is that young people in Guyana at this time only have a short period of time to look back upon to make decisions. See, going back to 1991 to 97 is not something that the average young voter is going to do. But looking back at the last 4 years is what a young person is likely to do. And looking back at the last 4 years, a young person will be confronted by huge numbers like $1.46 trillion in a budget and so on. In terms of looking back up to 2014, for now, what would you say to a young voter in terms of the performance of our economy and what direction it was heading and how best to take a position on such an issue?
Well, I think perhaps it might be, for me to be able to do that, I think we need to take a look at what happened during the APNU, PNC, AFC
yeah.
Period.
We're going there right now.
You know, I think you have a...
Yes, we have a table 5 there, table 4 there.
No, 5. I think you had a table 5.
We have a 5.
Which
Table 5 demonstrates over a very short period of time, the Granger-led government, without any additional resources of state, bringing some level of buoyancy to the economy, averaging out at almost 4% annual growth. Granger has been criticized as president for bringing 200 taxes, something we know is absolute misinformation. Mr. Winston Jordan has put paid to that at least on 2 occasions, right here in Nation Watch and in other places. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, with numbers up there on your screen indicative of or indicating the management and stewardship of Guyana's economy under David Granger as president and Winston Jordan as Minister of Finance. And Mr. Lucas will continue. I'm sorry for the rude interruption.
No. That's all right. I think that table, in a way, summarizes the comparison between the management of the economy under the PPP and the management of the economy by the coalition government of APNU and the AFC. I think what you see clearly is that in the 5 years that the APNU is given to, first of all, fix a lot of the problems, because clearly, if from 2000 to 2014, your economy could only grow at 2.66%, and you've had at least 3 points in time in which the economy shrank, then you knew that over that period of time, there were problems. And a lot of people may have forgotten about the Skeldon fiasco, where over $200 million was spent, and we haven't gotten anything of consequence out of that investment. I know a lot of people have forgotten that there was a financial scandal involving insurance companies in this country, where we actually lost one of our insurance companies, Clico,
and billions of dollars,
and billions of dollars with it. So you knew that there were problems, apart from all the other social ills that you alluded to just now. So in actual fact, the PPP, unlike what the PNC did in 1992, where the PNC handed them a strong economy, a robustly growing economy, they handed to the APNU coalition in 2015 an economy that was struggling. an economy that had a whole heap of problems. But yet, you can see from the data on that table, again, that is data if you went today to the 2023 budget speech of the PPP laid in Parliament, you will find that data. This is not Raw Lucas making up this. This is Raw Lucas extracting information laid before our Parliament in the form of a budget presentation, pulling out those numbers to help Guyanese to appreciate and understand that they're very often treated to a dose of you know, untruths which are not necessarily consistent with their reality in life in this country or living in this country. Now, so if you were to summarize this comparison, you know, between the 2000-2014 period, you will see that the economy experienced negative growth 3 times under the PPP.
Mm-hmm.
And that never happened under the APNU, PNC, or AFC coalition from 2015 to 2019. You'll see that. The PPP has never grown the economy faster than APNU. You can see from 2000 to 2014, the fastest the PPP was able to grow the economy was at 5.4%.
Yeah.
And you saw the APNU was actually increasing the growth rate when it demitted office. Because in 2019, you would see that the growth rate was 5.4%. So it was on a positive trajectory when, you know, of course, people felt that maybe the PPP's stories were better than the experiences that they were having under the coalition government. You know, so to me, the statistics and graphics that we have shown here indicate that the PNC can implement strong economic programs and manage the economy better than the PPP.
To the extent that in 1992, as well as 2020, PNC-led governments have left successor governments with solid economic footing or on solid economic footing with positive economic growth trajectory. Now, it was the APNU AFC that facilitated the extraction, successful extraction and revenue earnings from oil. Again, leaving the People's Progressive Party with a solid flow of revenues. There is that consistency. There's the other consistency where the People's Progressive Party have always held out that they have inherited an empty treasury. Comment, please, on those 2 points.
Well, I don't know how they rationalize their own stories, but I will say this, and in a way, I'm glad you have raised this point. You know, since the coalition government revealed the production sharing agreement between the government and the country and Exxon and its partners, people have focused on the comparison of our oil agreement, our PSA, with those of other countries. That is fair. But I think the mistake they're making is failing to compare the impact of the economic policies of the coalition, you know, PNC, APNU, and the AFC, with the economic impact of the PPP. You can see from the PSA what the coalition agreed that Exxon and its partners could enjoy in terms of economic policy. Nobody can tell me up to today what what is the details of the bauxite agreements that have been signed by the PPP government. Nobody today can tell me the impact of the manganese agreement that has been signed by the PPP government. Nobody up to today can tell me what is the impact of the forestry agreements that were signed by the PPP with these foreign groups. Nobody today can tell me what is the details and the impact of the pharmaceutical agreements that the PPP government has signed with the foreign investor that runs this new GPC organization. Nobody. But you can see what the production sharing agreement has done, what it says and we can see today the impact of that. Oil growth in 2020, our economy grew in 2020 by 38%. Our economy grew in 2021 by 25% or something like that. In 2022, the economy grew by another 60 something percent. And in 2023, I think it grew by another 33%. I mean,
which on paper looks excellent, except that there's no impact from that on the lives of ordinary citizens of the country.
And that is part of our problem. So what you're seeing again is the way in which resources are being managed by the PPP. They're spending money, lots of it, but people are not feeling the impact of those resources on their lives. So the point I really want to make here is this. And people have to stop looking at whether there's ring fencing and that fencing and decommissioning and that sort of thing in our PSA, because it is not going to change. We can take the lessons for the future, but what is relevant is the impact of those policies on the lives of the people of this country. And I'm telling you right now, and I guess people are experiencing it for themselves, that they are not feeling that they're included in the resources of our patrimony.
Two things here, Mr. Lucas. One is that citizens need to recognize that all of the development that is taking place in this country is thanks to the APNU AFC administration and that production sharing agreement, which is financing in large measure infrastructure and other developments across the country. Without oil, we would have been a mess, particularly under the People's Progressive Party. Now, that's the first point. The second thing is this. Bart Jagdeo had at his disposal 16% value-added tax, which was imposed on the citizens of this country. Citizens protested. We protested as parliamentarians back then in front of the parliament. The security forces locked us out of that brick dam roadway in front of the parliament because they knew we were there to protest. Although we were members of parliament, we were not allowed beyond the barriers. He had 16% VAT, from which he got a windfall in tax collection that was never used for the benefit of the citizens of this country in any significant way whatsoever. But the Granger administration of 2015 to 2020, instead of carrying on with Mr. Jagdeo's 13% value-added tax, 16% value-added tax, I beg your pardon, slashed it to 14%, 2 percentage points off, and still grew the national economy consistently. What does that say for Mr. Jagdeo and Dr. Ashney Singh, his Minister of Finance?
Well, what I would say to you is this. I think it clearly shows that there isn't sufficient sensitivity when it comes to dealing with the people of this country. I would say that when we take a look at the views, and I'll say this, I think I should say this at this point. I had an opportunity to speak with the leader of the opposition. And, he shared with me his views with respect to the people-centered development strategy. And I think when you listen to what he has to say, you would recognize that, how interested he is in the welfare of the people of this country compared to the way in which the PPP is treating the people of this country. I got the impression from Mr. Norton that he intends to ensure that oil money reaches the pockets of every Guyanese. That's his intention. I got the impression that, as far as he's concerned, every Guyanese will be given the opportunity to build the life that they want for themselves and their family, including owning their homes. I got the impression from him that he will incentivize workers to stay and build the country, as against those who are being very callous about the welfare and the living conditions and the quality of life of the people of this country. You see, what I recognize about Norton's people-centered development strategy is that it embraces the needs, ambitions, and aspirations of the people of this country. And to my mind, it will be a game changer. I think it is inclusive, and people will feel included in the national economy. Unlike the One Guyana slogan, which, contrary to its name, seeks to marginalize a large section of the populace, Norton's PCDS emphasizes collaboration and bringing people together. In looking at it, the many acts of the government leaves the people feeling as if One Guyana is about normalizing corruption and nepotism. But Norton's PCDS, Norton's People-Centered Development Strategy, aims to give every person in Guyana the freedom to be who they want to be and all they want to be. So I think people will be as excited as I am to hear him set out the details of his people-centered development strategy, and will want to join and support him to achieve those goals.
Which brings to mind two questions. The people-centered development strategy speaks of every citizen owning a home, a rent-to-pay scheme, where you buy a property, the house is constructed, it's fully equipped with all utilities and so on, and you pay a rent for as long as it takes to pay off the cost of the home. And when you pay it off, by the time you pay off the cost of the home, you get title to the property. It's now yours. So it's as though the old people used to call it balance parcel. It's like a higher purchase arrangement. On the other hand, the People's Progressive Party is talking about young professionals' homes, or homes for young professionals, the cost of which has gone up in some instances by more than 80%. In an economy where the working class, the working people, and these days more properly described as the working poor, can barely afford to eat, where are they going to get the money to pay for these homes, the prices of which have almost doubled?
Well, I can tell you from what you just described that life will remain tough under the PPP. The rent-to-own model that you just described, as far as I understand it, is just one option that is available in the Norton People-Centered Development Strategy. But I think what is critical in what you just described with respect to the the professional houses. I mean, this is information put out by the government, the Central Housing and Planning Authority. In 2020, 2021, they sold one of those one-level houses for about $14 million, and one of the two-level houses for about $20 million. Just recently, about a week or two ago, the Central Housing and Planning Authority advertised that a one-level house will now be $25 million. That is a 79, nearly 80% increase in the price of the house. And the two-level will go from 20 to 34, which is about a 70% increase in the price of the house. The troubling factor in all of this, as far as I'm concerned, has to do with the policies that the government of Guyana says are designed to keep the cost of housing and construction low. They removed the 2% withholding tax that contractors need to pay. They're the ones who introduced that taxing. They're the ones who introduced that tax, that 2% on contractors. Okay, they removed it, even though they tried to blame APNU for it. They made adjustments to freight costs, claiming that that will keep the cost of various things, items coming into the country, low. They provided a 0 rating on certain construction materials. They provide a reduction on the duty of cement. And yet, the cost has gone where it is. So it's telling Guyanese that with all these measures that the government claims it has put in place, it is unable to control the cost of living. It is able to control inflation in this country. And that is what people are living with. If you were to look at some, selected food items, you see the same thing. I mean, today, coconut water, for example.
If you can get it.
If you can get it, has jumped about 50-something% from where it was
a month ago.
Well,
yeah,
a month or so ago. It has jumped close to 70% from a year ago, and so forth. So, the other problem you have here is with all this construction that is taking place, you are seeing deadlines being missed. So you ask yourself the question, when you look at this housing and construction, set of housing and construction activities in the country, you ask yourself the question, well, what are these policies doing? How are you managing this economy?
Or where are the policies? We're running down on time here, Mr. Lucas, but the second question that came to mind when you spoke a moment ago has to do with the electricity crisis in Guyana. The GPL is the engine, if it works, that drives production in our country. And it has virtually collapsed. Now I understand that there's a power ship out there with the capacity for generating 36 megawatts of power. I don't know if it's installed. I know that we have some second or third hand generators which have failed. Those that have started, some have failed, some have never started. There is incompetence in the management of the energy sector in this country. How does that inform what will happen in an expanded grid were the PPP to be in government when such an expansion occurred?
Well, Mervyn, I will tell you that the current electricity situation, as far as I'm concerned, is clear proof of the false claims of the PPP. I heard the president attempting to blame the APNU and EFC administration.
Which of them, sir?
Well, I guess the one that was the subject of the eclipse. He's been attempting last week, I think on Friday, or him attempting to blame the current plight of GPL on the APNU coalition administration. But, you know, that can be debunked by looking at the budget speeches of 23 and 24. You know, in speaking about the electricity in 22, the budget speech of 23 says electricity expanded in 2022 by 9.3%. The expansion in the electricity supply was driven by higher total consumption. There was no alarm about sounded in the 2021, 2022, or 2023 budget speeches, and nothing was done to position GPL to be different. There was no request for money to avert or fix a crisis. None of that was identified in the budget speeches, before we started seeing what we saw here. So if the government waited until 2024 to figure out that there was a problem at GPL, it only has itself to blame, not the APNU, AFC. But more than that, if the allegation leveled by the president was correct, then GPL would have been in breach of the law. It would have been violating the law because GPL is required by law to produce a 5-year development and expansion plan, and to update those plans annually. When I left as chairman of GPL, we had a 2020 to 2024 plan prepared. It was available. Now, those plans, as far as I recall, had the electricity situation. It had in mind adding an additional 56 megawatts of conventional generating power on the Demerara-Berbice interconnected grid, by 2021. And by this year, up to an additional 120 megawatts more of conventional generating capacity would have been added to the system. So in other words, what I'm saying is that if the government had done what our plan said should be done, and instead of trying to rely on 185 or so megawatts of power, we would have actually had 350 to nearly 400 megawatts of power available today.
Since last year.
Well, at least we are in 2024,
Yeah.
so it would have been available today. So the information that I provided here really reveals the conundrum of the government and the real reason electricity supply lags demand. The problem is the government felt that the 350 megawatts that would have been in place in 2024, because of the plan put forward by the APNU AFC coalition, contradicted the 300 megawatts of gas to energy project that the government favored. That's the problem.
Say that slowly again with some more explanation for our viewers, please, Mr. Lucas. I'm not sure that everybody would have gotten you.
Well, the point I'm making here is that investing in GPL as APNU AFC coalition intended to do contradicts the darling project of the PPP, which is the gas to energy project, which would have generated 300 megawatts of conventional power. That's the problem. So they were caught in a conundrum, which means that they did not take all the risk factors into account when they looked at when they were developing this plan, this gas to energy project, and as a result has ended up putting this country in a mess. But that is not the that's not the full story. That is not the full story. The matter has been compounded by the collapse of about 30 megawatts of generating capacity at the Kingston power plant. And I'll tell you this, people who seem to know something about this problem are saying it is the quality of fuel and lubricants that have been used to manage that facility, which means, therefore, that a number of the parts of the system collapsed. And I think somebody said to me that they involved some of the crankshafts. So you can't fix that. You can't get that fixed. That is why you see they rush to bring some ship with, with the idea of connecting it to the grid. And you talk about 36 megawatts. Why do you think you're talking about 35 or 36?
To balance out.
It's to balance out the 30 megawatts that we have a problem with right now. So all of this points to the incompetence, the inability of these fellows to really manage the economy for Guyanese instead of for themselves. That is what you're really seeing here. And that is part of the problem that we have.
The final words from Mr. Ra Lucas, economist, accountant, former chair of Guyana Power and Light and of the Guyana Revenue Authority. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas, for joining me here on Nation Watch. I know that beyond any reasonable doubt, we have established, for the benefit of our viewing public, that the economy of this country is in bad hands, that governments led by the PNC or governments involving the PNC have done a better job over the years. So as we come closer to elections, whenever they come, regional and general elections, we will be bringing you more information of this nature so that you can make your decisions from an informed position. Thank you very much for joining us on Nation Watch from wherever you're joining us. Thank you for staying with us the course of the program. Until we meet again, God bless.